It's the 102nd day of the year 2020. And today I'd like to take the time to talk about something rather important. Death and what happens when we die. What do the scriptures say about that? There's a lot of things you hear, things you read, memes on Facebook, and different things that people say to console themselves. But what does the scripture really say about what happens when we die? What can we look forward to? And is that it? I think to know what happens, it's important to understand how we became. How was man created? In Genesis 2:7, it says, "And Elohim formed," that is, Yasser, he did what a potter does with his hands. He formed the man out of the dust. Out of the dust of the ground, that is the Adamah in Hebrew. It's where Adam got his name. I mean, my name is mud. Out of the dust of the ground, the Adamah, and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. Now this is where it really happens. And breathed, that is to blow his ruach, his spirit, his essence, into the nostrils of the formed man, the breath of life. The neshama, which means breath of life, chahi. That's why when in Jewish movies and stuff, they raise a toast and they say, l'chaim, it's to life. And the man became a living being. Now that term living being, that being is nefesh, and it means a soul, living being, life, self, person, desire, passion, appetite, emotion. It's you. You are nefesh. You have your body that was made from the earth, Adamah, and you have your nefesh. It's important to understand these terms going forward, because otherwise we start convoluting it with outside ideas. That's not what the scriptures don't have outside it. So Adam, literally of the ground, was formed with dust and the breath from Elohim that gave him life. So after Adam was brought to life, then in verse 15 of Genesis 2, it says, "And Elohim took the man, Adam, and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and to guard it. And Elohim commanded the man, saying, Eat of every tree of the garden, but do not eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for in the day that you eat of it, you shall certainly die." Die. What is die? Well, as many of you know, Adam did eat from that tree that didn't belong to him. He had everything else to eat from, but he had to eat that one that was not his. And so Yahweh says to him, "By the sweat of your face you are to eat bread until you return to the ground. For out of it you were taken, for dust you are, and to dust you return." Up until this point, Adam, from the earth, there was no stopping point. He would live forever, continually in the garden, guarding it, working it, not eating of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. But he had no termination point. But now that he had transgressed the law that Yah had given him, now Death has entered in. Now he has a finite ending. The process of death begins. Adam is no longer immortal, but finite, and to the dust he returns. We look at Job 34. In verse 14, it declares, if he, that is Yah, sets his heart, or Yah's heart, on man, should he gather to himself his spirit and his breath, all flesh would expire together, and man would return to dust. So in Job 34, it says that if he was to decide that he wanted to take back that breath, then all flesh would expire together, and man would return to dust. So it's that spirit, that ruach, that was breathed into Adam, that continues through every man after that, that allows us to live. It's what keeps us from going back to becoming dust. Without his spirit and his breath, we would expire and return to dust. Ecclesiastes 12:7 says, the dust returns to the earth as it was, and the spirit returns to Elohim who gave it. So when we die, all goes back to how it was. It's like I like to say, the Sadducees didn't believe in the resurrection, and that's why they were so sad, you see. So what is this? Is it that the end is like the Sadducees believe, that man lives and then dies, and his God takes back what he gave to give him life, and then we just return to dust? What of resurrection? That's kind of the thing, isn't it? Yeshua said, I am the resurrection. He received word that that his friend Lazarus was dying. He waited because he was set about to accomplish something. Well, while they were waiting, they got word back that he had died, and the disciples asked Yeshua, they said, well, what happens now? He's dead. And Yeshua said, no, he's asleep. He sleeps. Oh, well, if he's sleeping, then he should be getting better, because if he gets enough rest, then you'll recover. And then Yeshua looked at him and said, no, he's dead, okay? So over and over and over again in the scriptures, it talks about those that have died, they're asleep in the earth. Well, that's because their body goes back to the grave, to Sheol, to be buried. I mean, however it ends up. And God takes the spirit that animated that person back to himself. So when Yeshua arrived and Mary and Martha were inconsolable, he tried to console them and say, look, I am the resurrection. But they were so overwhelmed that they got him crying because he was so moved by them. But he was able to resurrect Lazarus, wasn't he? But after that, then Lazarus went around, gave his testimony. The people at the temple that had it out for Yeshua, they conspired to kill Lazarus. So he dies, and then those Pharisees and the Sanhedrin, different ones that was against Yeshua, decided that they wanted to kill him again. Well, fact of the matter is, Lazarus did die again at some point, because when he was raised, he was just raised back he was just called out to be what he was, dust. And to that dust he returned. Now I want to go to 1 Corinthians 15. Because the story doesn't end with dust. And the story doesn't end with, as we've all heard by now, Yeshua dying on the cross, right? Verse 16, it says, if the dead are not raised, then neither has Messiah been raised. And if Messiah has not been raised, your belief is of no purpose, and you're still in your sins. Then also those who have fallen asleep, those that have died in Messiah, have perished. If in this life we only have expectation in Messiah, we are of all men the most wretched. But now Messiah has been raised from the dead. He has become the first fruit of those who have fallen asleep. Now, first fruit, what exactly does that mean? Well, of the feasts that they celebrated, you had at this time of year, and it actually, by the way, the calendar works out just like it did this year, on Tuesday. Now, keep in mind that the days start and end in the evening as the light mixes. It was set that way since Genesis. So on Tuesday, they had the Last Supper, and that was when Yeshua broke bread with his disciples, and Judas had his hand in the bread in the cup with him, and it's time to go, and everybody thought Judas went out to get the last bit of Passover stuff. He was betrayed that night. Then Wednesday was Passover, and so that Tuesday night then is when Yeshua was arrested. He was betrayed by Judas. He was arrested, went through the kangaroo court, sent up to the Romans. And on Wednesday, as the Passover had begun and the priests at the temple were sacrificing lambs like crazy, because you couldn't start cooking your lamb until you brought it home from the temple where it had been sacrificed. That day then, as the lambs were being sacrificed, Yeshua was sacrificed on the cross by the Romans. And so then he was laid in the tomb. So day 1, Thursday, day 2, Friday, and day 3, Saturday, he was in the tomb. And that's what he said when the priests asked him. They said, well, show us a sign. How do we know that you are who you say you are? And he said, the only sign I'm going to give you is the sign of Jonah. For 3 days, he was in the belly of the whale. So here he was in the belly of the earth for 3 days. And then Saturday, at the mixing of the light, to begin Sunday, which would be Saturday evening, then he arose. Now, according to Leviticus 23, the first Sabbath on the Feast of Unleavened Bread is the first fruits. In the time in Israel, then they would have their harvest, and the first grain that came in, the first barley that came in, then on the day after Saturday, the day after the Sabbath, they would wave that first grain offering and present it to God. Well, as it turns out, he was the first fruit offering, and he went and ascended to the Father and presented himself to the Father as the first fruit, and that's exactly what Paul Shaul is talking about here, when he has become the first fruit of those who have fallen asleep. For since death is through a man, resurrection of the dead is also through a man. For as all die in Adam, so also all shall be made alive in Messiah. For each in his own order: Messiah, the first fruits, then those who are of Messiah at his coming, then to the end. He was the first fruit. He was the first one to be raised, and when he was raised, it wasn't just with an Adam body, the earth body, but it was unto his heavenly body, right? Then when he comes back, then those that are in Messiah will be raised up. When then in the end, when he delivers up the reign to Elohim the Father, so when he presents to his Father, when he has brought to naught all the rule and all authority and power, for he has to reign until he has put all enemies under his feet. So this is the time of the millennial kingdom, that he puts all his enemies under his feet. And the last enemy to be brought to naught is death. Verse 50, so I say this, brothers, that flesh and blood is unable to inherit the reign of Elohim, neither does corruption inherit incorruption. See, I speak a secret to you. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed. For a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet, that last trumpet For the trumpet shall sound, and the dead shall be raised incorruptible, and we shall be changed. For this incorruptible has to put on incorruption, and this mortal has to put on immortality. So you can't exist forever in this Adam earth body. You have to have a new body, an incorruptible body. And that's what we, as our corruptible earth bodies are laid to rest. And that's what they used to always say, rest in peace, right? They rest in peace until that last shout, or until that last trumpet and the shout, and then they arise with new bodies, okay? So what can we expect? If we're in Messiah, when he comes back on that last day, and he blows the trumpet and gives out a shout, then you'll rise with an incorruptible body, okay? Now, that's not everybody, but that's everybody that is in Messiah. So that's important to know. First Thessalonians 4:13, it says, Now, brothers, we do not wish you to be ignorant concerning those who have fallen asleep or died, lest you be sad as others who have no expectation. For if we believe that Yeshua died and rose again, so also Elohim shall bring with him those who sleep in Messiah. For we say to you by the word of the Master, that we, the living who are left over at the coming of the Master, shall in no way go before those who are asleep, because the Master himself shall come down from heaven with a shout, and with the voice of a chief messenger, and the trumpet of Elohim, and the dead in Messiah shall rise first. Then we, the living who are left over, shall be caught away together with them in the clouds to meet the Master in the air. And so we shall always be with the Master. So then, encourage one another with these words. So in this time, when we celebrate the resurrection of the Messiah, he's the first fruit offering to his Father. Let's remember that he's our example. Okay, he was an example of how to live, example of how to follow God's commandments, how to love one another. He was an example of death, that he would be in the ground and that he would rise again in a glorified body and present himself to God. I mean, that's what we are to encourage one another with, is that we will be like him someday, and then he's coming back so that we can be with, tabernacle with him. That's what happens on the 8th day. We tabernacle with him.